So when you speak about data engineering, a lot of people have the same mindset. I'm going to get to work with petabytes of data. I'm going to make loads of money. It's going to be really exciting challenges to face and to solve. And I sort of thought the same thing when I moved into data engineering. I lasted about 8 months before I realized this is entirely not what I thought it was going to be. Now I'm going to go over 5 things that particularly stood out to me because I think they're very important if you work in data and are thinking about switching, or if you're thinking about a career in data. Now, backstory. I was a software engineer, a career changer. I moved into data engineering after a couple of years because I got the opportunity to work for one of the biggest health retailers in the UK, without mentioning any names. Most people in the UK would already know what that is. And I thought the grass was going to be greener. I thought it was going to be a huge career. It was 2021, 2022. Data was all the rage. It's all everyone was talking about. Be a data engineer, you're going to make loads of money. The world needs data people, which, all right, there's some truth to. But I wish I knew these things before I went into it, because it did sort of sidestep my career a little bit. I made up that time and I learned some new skills, so it wasn't that bad overall. But let's get into it so you know what these things are, to save yourself some hassle if that's what it's going to lead down to. Or if you are a data engineer, I'd be interested to know your thoughts on some of them as well. Let's cover it. I put my hat on. My head gets cold. I don't want to scare the children. Okay, so the first point I'm going to cover. Now, what a lot of you may know, what you may not know without making any assumptions, is that with software engineering, when you build stuff, it sort of goes out there. Now, you do go into a process of maintaining a system. So say, for example, you built a new application for a company, it's end-to-end owned. So then you'd start to go through the login, you'd monitor it, make sure it's being used, then you build new things, but there's always something new to be doing. Now, the first thing, as I said, I'm going to go over, one of the things that I think frustrated me most about being a data engineer was the firefighting. And it's not even the cool type of firefighting, going into a building, saving a kid, pat on the back, medal from the mayor, that kind of thing. No, when I say firefighting in terms of data engineering, I mean a Spark job has failed at 3 o'clock in the morning and this data has stopped processing, and you need to get up because you're on call, reset these Airflow pipelines, these Spark jobs, get the data back in, find out why it broke, do a whole sort of investigation as to why it happened, and then carry on with your day-to-day life. Now, for me personally, I didn't really find that intriguing at all. I actually found it quite frustrating, especially because it took up about 50 to 60% of my time, that I thought would be better spent actually doing stuff. Now, we did go through the process of improving our systems, because you could probably sit there and say, well, your systems were crap, because that never happens to us if you're a data engineer. But let's face it, you can't, data is different, right? Data is unpredictable. You don't know when it's going to go down, what's going to cause it to go down. There could be a semicolon, somewhere it's not supposed to be, which causes the whole thing to flip its head. There we are. Firefighting was one of the most frustrating things, because I just felt like I was never doing anything worthy or contributing towards moving the team forwards or moving the work forwards, because we were always trying to fix what we'd previously, the ingest pipelines that were failing. Do a top button for you saucy ones checking me out. Okay, so that's one of the reasons that sort of hit me most, and I bet if any of you are watching this as data engineers, you're probably going to relate to that. The second thing that sort of really stood out to me after around 3 to 4 months of being a data engineer. Now, when you're a software engineer, right, I'm going to keep going back between the two. When you're a software engineer, say for example, you're a front-end developer, you build something tangible, right? You're building a form, an input component, you're building a website, whatever it is, it's going to have a user, it's going to have an end customer, it's going to be a product owner, and there's a tangible benefit or a tangible way to assess the work that you're doing. You can physically see what you're building. Now, if you're a back-end developer, again, you're building an API, okay, or a server. Now, you can't physically see it, but people are interacting with it. There's documentation. Hey, I need to get this data from the API. The key's not working. What's going on? There's a process involved, right? So it's more tangible. Now, with data, you are essentially taking the data from one place to the other. It's invisible, right? There's nothing you can physically see. You are taking an ingest from a Kafka topic or some other place. You're doing some manipulation on it, sanitizing it, cleaning it, and then you're taking it and putting it in an S3 bucket. You are not going to see the data. You're not going to physically get to move physically grab it and move it, sort of thing, which for me felt very detached. It's almost like, how did that happen? Magic. Okay, carry on. Now, of course, magic is a big part of software engineering, because a lot of the times, how the hell did that happen? I don't know. It's magic. Okay. And that's the way it is. But with data, it was a little bit more frustrating because I was doing the same thing over and over, which I'll touch on in the next point. Therefore, I found it a little bit frustrating to not be getting any new challenges, but also not being able to tangibly see what I'm doing or the benefit of what I'm doing. Now that leads me on to point number 3. Depending on the company that you go to, data engineering can be seen as a different things. So in my company as a data engineer, I was essentially a glorified pipeline engineer. I was building ingest pipelines into a data warehouse, and there was no other scope for me to try anything new. Now, if you compare that to another company, which I know of, where the data engineers actually do some BI, they do some data warehousing, so there's some Python and SQL involved, they get to see a bit more of the end-to-end of where the data goes, what happens with it, cleaning it, sorting it, and making some basic visualizations from it. Now, it might sound like a lot, but small things like getting to do that actually keep the job more exciting. They make it more fun. They make it more involved. You get to challenge a few different skills, which I always like to do. I find it very boring if I have to do the same thing over and over and over. Okay, so far we've covered the sort of firefighting, which takes up a lot of your time, fixing a lot of the jobs that you've set up in, say, Spark or Airflow. We've covered that it's not very tangible. You can't really see what you're building. We've also covered that the data engineer role means different things to different companies. Now, the fourth thing that I found kind of frustrating when it came down to data engineering was, and this is going to sound really vain, but there's not much recognition for your work, right? Essentially, you're a coal miner. You're down there covered in dust and crap, and you're not getting any glory for what you do because you're digging for the diamonds, but you're not making anything from them. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, take your business analysts, take your data scientists, take your people who are taking the data that you've put into an S3 bucket. They're making the business decisions based off it. It's always, well, thanks, we've made this brilliant decision from these business analysts. Aren't they fantastic? Look at what these data scientists have predicted. It's so amazing. Where would we be without them? And it's never, well, thanks data engineers for getting us that data, sanitize it, cleaning it, and making it accessible to us in the first place. Now, okay, that might be a little bit vain, but I do enjoy working with the end customer. I enjoy people saying thank you for the work that you did. I enjoy feeling like I'm part of a team that's moving the company forwards, as opposed to just being a cog who has to do his job so everybody else can do theirs. Now, the fifth thing that I found very sort of hard to get along with in data engineering was the cross collaboration across teams. Now, with software engineering, if you're a front-end developer, you work with back-end developers as well, because you'll get together and they'll be like, hey, this is the data structure from the API. This is how it's going to work. This is how we handle errors and responses. Or it might be that you take that conversation to the back-end developers. You might actually say, hey, backend developers, this is the structure that I need, this is the endpoint, this is how I'm going to pass the API key, and you're going to work like that. It might be with the DevOps people as well. But with data engineering, you're never working with the data scientists, you're never working with the business analysts. There's no cross-team collaboration, which I found very isolating. Now, don't get me wrong, I was working on a good team and I love the people I worked with, very intelligent, but it was essentially a data engineer's day-to-day. There was nothing further than that. Now, of course, this might not be your experience as a data engineer, but the final thing I will say on this is that data engineering is very nerdy. Now, look how many screens I've got. I'm a nerd. I've got like 3 MacBooks and Mac Minis, and I do all sorts of networking stuff. I love software engineering. I genuinely do love my job. But being a nerd as a data engineer is entirely a different level of nerd. You've got to love things like the ingest time of Parquet versus JSON files. Like, how is a CSV going to be quicker? How can we take 0.2 milliseconds ingest time of this? And mad things like that. And I think unless you very much enjoy the small nuances and figuring out these small details, that is probably not going to be enjoyable for you, unless that's where you find fulfillment, of course. Now, this has been my experience as a data engineer, why I went back into software engineering. I'd love to hear your input, if you've done either, which one you prefer and why. And I think people in the comments who are also looking for career advice would probably be interested in hearing that too. So make sure you leave it.